Hello there, Star Wars fans. Welcome back to another episode of Stories by Darksaber Light. I'm Jess.
And I'm Arica Jade.
And we are coming to you after a very long and even unexpected hiatus. Life got in the way, lots going on, and I'll admit, I didn't get into podcasting expecting to have to do so much with technology and editing. And so if any of our listeners have a real big passion for editing or other technology related to podcasting and you want to give me some help or recommendations, please feel free to reach out because I can use all the help that I can get. As for now, though, I've just tried to keep the mentality that anything worth doing is worth doing poorly. So I'm just looking at this like we're just coming to you, having a casual conversation, and you're going to get us unfiltered. If that's what it's going to take to help us to create more content, then that's what we're going to do. And we really do. We want to be here and having these conversations. We're so excited about the new Star Wars content that we are getting. And it was always my intention to get this podcast back up and off the ground, especially before the Obi-Wan Kenobi series, because that's something that I'm really excited about. But the Book of Boba Fett has proved to be far more engaging than I think I personally expected. And we're getting a lot of new content and we have a lot of thoughts. So today we're going to be reflecting on the newest episode of the Book of Boba Fett, episode 5, which is basically the Mandalorian season 2.5, I guess. So I guess it'll kind of be good because that's basically what the podcast was reflecting on when you last heard us. Along the way, we'll talk Boba Fett, we'll talk Bad Batch, any of this new content that we've had. We can certainly always go back and talk about that, but today it's about the return of the Mandalorian on the Book of Boba Fett. And I guess we're just going to start off with some general reaction. So Arica, let's hear what you got.
I thought this was a really great episode, and yeah, I really enjoyed it. It was a surprise seeing that it was entirely a Din Djarin episode, but I didn't really have too many problems with that. I thought the additions to the story and the things it was setting up for Mandalorian season 3 were really interesting. So yeah, I really enjoyed it.
I absolutely did too. I mean, there's a reason why we're coming to you with this episode in mind, and it really was just this episode kind of blew me away. It was, I think, the heaviest that we've gotten in new Mando lore, which is kind of funny that this is not happening in the show The Mandalorian, but new Mando lore. And then just, the way that I described it was that this was just pure Star Wars for me. I was just a wreck in the first half as we're finding out more about what the Mandalorians have gone through. And then I ended the episode with the biggest smile on my face because I just absolutely loved the ending with the building of the ship and the racing around the canyon and the throwbacks to the Phantom Menace and Din getting pulled over again by the space cops. So this was just, like I said, pure Star Wars. And I really have to give a shout out to Bryce Dallas Howard. This is her third episode and she has killed it every single time. I am just so in awe of everything that she's doing because this is not a very plot heavy episode. It's literally just in the first half, Din finds his covert and learns more about the history of Mandalore. And then the second half is this building of the ship. And it's only because of her direction that it was as engaging to watch as any great big space battle. And so all I'm saying is that this woman's killing it. I want to see her so much more. There's lots of rumors going around about what content we're going to be getting. All I know is that if there is a Bo-Katan series that's coming up, like has been rumored, I want her to have full creative
Mm.
directorial control. I think that would be absolutely phenomenal. So yeah, absolutely blown away.
Yeah, I definitely agree with all of that. I think Bryce deserves her own show. Definitely. I've seen several other people talking about that, and I know, yeah, there are those rumors that there is going to be a Bo-Katan show, and I would hope that she would be headlining that if that's true. And I'll just throw a bone out there. If they ever do anything with my favorite redhead, who is, no offense, Bo-Katan, it's Mara Jade, I would trust Bryce with it. She'd probably be the top person I would trust with it. So yeah, give Bryce more projects.
Give Bryce more redheads.
She is one, so there you
Exactly.
go.
No, I think that would be perfect. So I'm excited to see more from her. I just love the fact that like she's been trained to do this, and her father did a great job with his own Star Wars directorial work, and she's following in his footsteps. And that's just, I don't know, there's just something about there's a lot of great directors, a lot of really good female directors. I've been loving seeing how much we're getting more female leadership in some of this new stuff. But there's just something about Bryce Dallas Howard when I see pictures of her behind the scenes, seeing her direct, that she's got a confidence and just a demeanor that's just, I mean, it almost makes me emotional because she is just so on top of everything, and it just absolutely shows that she's got such a mastery over this craft. So kudos to her. Today we are going to be um, not not so much focusing on giving an overview of the synopsis of the episode. Like I said, this is not a very plot heavy episode. So it's not really worth our time to go through scene by scene. What we've got today though is we've got I wanted to do some Q&A. There's been a lot going around Twitter with people being confused by some new information that we've gotten, confusions on just kind of the timeline that we've been hearing about, kind of everything that's been going on with Mandalore post the Clone Wars through the Book of Boba Fett. So I plan to just kind of clear that up a little bit. I really like I don't know. I've kind of tried to build myself as kind of the Mandalorian historian, and there's a lot that I think actually does match up, but is just kind of difficult to suss out how it all fits together. So that's why I'm here, and hopefully this will be a good resource for anybody who does have questions on some of the new stuff that we're getting. And then after that, we've just got some other topics that we'll end with talking about, and where we think that this is going, and so should be a good time. So Arica, I hope I don't bore you as I just talk at you for a bit about what we're learning. But the first thing that I wanted to go through, because people ask me about this a lot, is just the timeline. When things have happened, the differences between, we're hearing things like the Purge, the Night of a Thousand Tears, the Siege of Mandalore, and all of these things have been talked about on screen, but it's been really hard to piece out where they come together. So what I wanted to do is just start even pre-Clone Wars and kind of give you an idea of what we have seen. And I am just sticking to canon. There's a lot in Legends. There's a lot even that I suspect is kind of implied in canon, but has not been made explicit. So I'm just trying to stick with what we've seen on screen, and I'll try to give sources when I have them so that you know where I'm pulling all this from. And as such, I'm making good use of my 2 history degrees by being a historian of a fictional world. So I've made it, Mom. The degrees were worth it. So before the Clone Wars, pre-Clone Wars, what we know is that there was a Mandalorian Civil War. We don't know exactly how long it lasted. We don't know exactly the years that it happened. But what we know is that during this Civil War, we had Mandalorians fighting each other. The episode of the Clone Wars, Voyage of Temptation, actually says that the majority of Mandalorians, most of the people, were killed in this war. So that just kind of, we're going to be talking about the Purge in this episode, but like this is really not the first time that full-scale destruction of the Mandalorian people has happened. And so what we hear is that this civil war basically took out most of the people, and that out of the ashes of this war rose the pacifists. And I'm not going to get too deep into kind of the supplemental material. There was a novelization of Shades of Reason and the Lawless, which I really recommend. It's in the Darth Maul Shadow Conspiracy book, and it adds a lot of context to the Mandalorian Civil War. But suffice it to say, the pacifists took over, and it was in this book. It's very clear that this is not a monarchical thing. This is something where Satine was chosen by the clan leaders, and she was backed up by them. And so I just want to mention that because in this new episode, we get a lot of talk about Bo-Katan and her family line. And it's not as clear cut as just saying that the Kreeses were this monarchical line who wanted to rule because of that. But like I said, that's not on screen, so I'm going to try to stay away from that more supplemental material. What we know is that I'm just kind of giving an overview of this era. Obi-Wan Kenobi was born in about 57 BBY. Satine's coronation probably took place around 37 BBY. That's not entirely solidified either, but we can at least kind of guess that they were probably in their late teens when that took place. And then what we see is we get everything that we saw in the Clone Wars. We got the rise of Death Watch. We got the corruption episodes where we're seeing that the internal affairs of Mandalore have their own issues. And then we get the return of Darth Maul teaming up with Death Watch to usurp Satine, and that happens in 19 BBY. So Satine was on the throne maybe for about 18 years. That's what we can assume. Maul takes over, Bo-Katan leaves, believing that he is not the appropriate ruler to rule Mandalore. She leaves and she takes Ursa Wren and a couple of the other supporters of her own from Death Watch. And then in that same year is when we get the episode arc of the Clone Wars entitled The Siege of Mandalore. That's kind of important. So the Siege of Mandalore, the episode arc, takes place in 19 BBY. This is when Bo takes Mandalore back from Maul. We leave them in that episode arc with Maul being taken away, but and with Bo in charge. But what we see is that I believe there are still some clones on Mandalore, but Ahsoka leaves. There are no Jedi on Mandalore as far as we know when Order 66 happens. And so we don't really know what happens at that point. My guess is that the clones do not react to Order 66 because there are no Jedi around. And the implications that we do have are that Bo has some time to rule as the ruler of Mandalore. We kind of get implications from that from Fen Rao in Rebels, who talks about the fact that like Bo takes over and people do legitimately believe that she is the rightful ruler, which again is kind of important because this episode of Boba Fett, the Armorer, really hammers the fact that like people think Bo is cursed, and that's not the case originally. People really did believe that Bo was the rightful ruler. She had time to start kind of bringing things back under control, but pretty soon after Order 66, we don't have a firm timeline, the Empire descends and takes Mandalore back. Again, this is probably happening with the help of clones. And I've always assumed the reason why Bo gets really upset with Boba Fett when they meet in The Mandalorian and she says, "You're a clone. I've heard your voice 1,000 times before." Because she's heard the voice of these people who have helped the Empire take over the home that they actually helped her get back. So she's got reasons to be distrustful of clones as well. So Mandalore's out of Bo's hands. We do not know what happens for basically the next 19 years. It's likely that Bo was trying to find different ways to take Mandalore back. I actually have a headcanon that I really wish Dave Filoni would pick up on, which is that the Empire captured her and froze her in carbonite for 15 years, which is how we could get away with explaining the fact that she still looks so young when she should be much older than she is right now. But again, I digress. What we know is she shows up in Rebels season 4. That's 1 BBY. So this is very shortly before A New Hope. She gets the Darksaber in that episode. She has not had it before. And if you'll remember, Sabine, possessed by a Night Sister spirit, gets the Darksaber from Maul. He's not there anymore. She takes it. I say this so that we can recognize that she also has not won this sword in combat, but she just took it. She gave it to Bo-Katan, who also took it. And it seems like at that point, the clans recognized her again as the leader of Mandalore and swore their allegiance to her. What we know then is that she starts building a resistance, and we do not know how long she gets to do that. All we know is that now that resistance was put down by the Empire in an event known as the Purge. Now, we've heard that name before, but I want to just emphasize the fact that this is kind of the first time that we're getting a lot of clarity about what and when the Purge happened. In season 1 of The Mandalorian, we got a couple of different comments. We had the armorer who mentioned that the Beskar that Din gives her was gathered in the Great Purge. Paz Vizsla also mentions that this Beskar is the spoils of the Great Purge, the reason why we live hidden like sand rats. And then what we get also in season 1 of The Mandalorian is we get a comment made by Moff Gideon that introduces 2 other terms or concepts. He says, perhaps the decommissioned Mandalorian hunter Din Djarin has heard the songs of the Siege of Mandalore, when gunships outfitted with similar ordnance laid waste to fields of Mandalorian recruits in the Night of 1,000 Tears. Now, this caused a lot of confusion because this episode obviously premiered after we had already gotten an episode arc entitled The Siege of Mandalore. And so what is clear from his quote is that the Siege of Mandalore and the Night of 1,000 Tears happen at the same time. So people started assuming that the Night of 1,000 Tears happens during the episode arc, The Siege of Mandalore. And personally, I was I was not buying into that even in season 1. And the reason why is because we don't see that happen in the Siege of Mandalore. And that's a really good thing, because based on what he says, if Mandalorian recruits are being mowed down during that episode arc, it would have been done by the Republic and by Bo-Katan. So it didn't ever really make any sense that the Siege of Mandalore that Moff Gideon is talking about actually matched up to that episode arc. And that's been confirmed now, basically. So what have we gotten now about these 3 different terms? The armorer, when Din sees her again, says, had our sect not been cloistered on the moon of Concordia, we would not have survived the Great Purge. Eventually, the Imperial interlopers destroyed all that we knew and loved in the Night of 1,000 Tears. So, what we have is that the Night of 1,000 Tears definitely happens in the Imperial era. Thus, the Siege of Mandalore and the Great Purge itself also has to happen at that same time as well. Season 2 kind of complicated the idea of the Great Purge, because Bo-Katan says that she fought in it. She says, I fought in the Purge. And that to me kind of suggested that the Great Purge was not an event so much as it was something that happened over a longer period of time. And that also seems to kind of be what's been confirmed now. So if I had to, my working theory then is that the Great Purge is the Empire's overarching action to try to crush Bo-Katan's resistance. The Night of a Thousand Tears is basically the Red Wedding event, to use a Game of Thrones reference, where they try to take everybody out at once. And that makes sense then, because what we also got is that the Night of a Thousand Tears also matches up with something else that we heard about, which is the Glassing of Mandalore, which was what Boba Fett talks about in season 2 of The Mandalorian, where he says that the Empire turned Mandalore to glass, and we really didn't know what that meant. But I knew that there was going to be some pretty big destruction, because if it's glassed, I mean, it was already a barren desert, so something else bad had to have happened. Din also mentions in season 2 of The Mandalorian that once the Empire knew that they couldn't control Mandalore, they made sure no one else could either. I was expecting that Sundari would be destroyed, and I was very upset when it happened anyway. That is, to me, Sundari is very much Satine's legacy. So to see that just completely destroyed after she worked so hard to lead her people in peace, it's just really sad, because part of it's like, well, this was always going to kind of happen. Her rule of pacifism wasn't really going to be able to exist in especially the Imperial era, but at the same time, it's also kind of like, I mean, this is exactly what she wanted to avoid in the first place. So to see that destroyed was really hard. But now we know that the Night of a Thousand Tears, the Siege of Mandalore, which is what Moff Gideon is talking about, the Glassing of Mandalore, the Destruction of Sundari, it's all one big event that all takes place during this period known as the Great Purge. So thankfully, that's actually pretty solidified now. And I'm really glad to see that there's a fairly decent amount of internal cohesion with that, because I was not sure for a while if there would be. So that's what gets us to like in the original trilogy era. We do not know yet when the Night of a Thousand Tears happened. It must have happened sometime after season 4 of Rebels, as Bo-Katan's building her resistance, and then sometime before, likely the end of Return of the Jedi, if we're assuming that the Empire's power is basically crushed at that point. So Return of the Jedi happens for ABY. So we've got basically a period of about 5 years where the Mandalorian resistance is rising, and then it's quashed. Also interesting to note that in this episode, the armorer says that Moff Gideon has the blood of millions of our people on his hands, which does give you the scale that if she is indeed talking about Bo-Katan's resistance, that it was a big thing. It wasn't just a rinky-dink little rebellion. So once again, the Mandalorians have just been absolutely crushed, and this has happened within about 40 years of each other. So not good. And then if you know the timeline for The Mandalorian and the Book of Boba Fett, the Ahsoka series, this is all, we're at about 9 or 10 ABY. So we're about 10 years after the Purge. What that also means is that the epilogue of Rebels happens in 5 ABY. So when we see Sabine, we know that she has survived the Great Purge. We don't have any knowledge of whether or not her family has survived the Great Purge. We don't know about Fen Rao or Corky Kryze or anybody else. But we will surely find out more about that as we go along as well. I'm preparing for the worst and hoping for the best. Arica, any thoughts after getting a history lesson on all of this?
Fingers crossed for Corky.
That's all I'm saying. That's all I really care about.
I really hope he's not dead. But again, yeah. I'll try to brace myself for the worst, and
Yeah.
maybe the worst will not happen, but we'll see.
I just, there's that really interesting line where Bo-Katan says, I fought in the Purge, I am the last of my line. And part of me thinks, that really kind of sounds like he did die in the Purge. But part of me also thinks that's the perfect kind of line to subvert our expectations on, Mr. Dave, Mr. John. That would
Yep.
be really nice.
Yep.
Okay, so that's timeline issues. Hopefully we can put all that aside. Hopefully that makes a lot of sense. If something doesn't make sense, please feel free to @me at Darksaber Light on Twitter, and we can continue this conversation. Other couple things that I just wanted to mention are just kind of some of the new stuff that we've gotten from this episode. This is the stuff that kind of complicates or fills out what we've known in the past. There's a lot. And there's a lot that now it raises just as many questions as it gives us answers. I was very happy that they did indeed address the reason why Bo-Katan did not accept the Darksaber from Din in season 2 of The Mandalorian. Everybody got really upset by that, kind of the same way that they did about the idea of like, why can't Din take off his helmet in season 1? These things will be answered. They're not trying to keep these answers from us. So again, I was really encouraged by the fact that I think that we got a pretty good explanation. I was really worried that they were going to try to hand wave this whole thing, but I do kind of like the idea of this curse, because it's as much of a psychological impediment as it is just kind of, added for plot convenience. The armorer says that Bo-Katan Kryze is a cautionary tale. She once laid claim to rule Mandalore based purely on blood and the sword you now possess, but it was gifted to her and not won by creed. Bo-Katan Kryze was born of a mighty house, but they lost sight of the way. Her rule ended in tragedy. They lost their way, and we lost our world. Had our sect not been cloistered on the moon of Concordia, we would not have survived the Great Purge. Only those that walked the way escaped the curse prophesied in the creed. Though our numbers were scattered to the winds, our adherence to the way has preserved our legacy for the generations until we may return someday to our home world. So, a couple things that we've got in here. It's very clear that we're hearing this news about the curse from the armorer, who herself says that she was not on Mandalore when it happened. That's a pretty good guess then that she was probably not involved in Bo's resistance. But she and anybody else associated with the Children of the Watch were on the Moon of Concordia. And if you remember from the Clone Wars, the Moon of Concordia is where basically the warriors who were not willing to go along with the new Mandalorian government were basically sequestered. And just as a note, I always like to remind people that it was not that they were like shuttled there and like kept under like lock and guard. Like they were put there and actually seemed to have been able to like live out their warrior ways. Satine actually gave them a governor who existed. Basically, she says that Concordia is an independent province, so the warriors are not even under Satine's rule. So I just like to mention that because it's very clear that they're not being massacred or imprisoned or anything like that. However, we do not yet know the relationship between Death Watch as we see in the Clone Wars and this Children of the Watch, and that's something that I get a lot of questions about too. There is no real good answer yet. We've talked about this on this podcast before, kind of suggesting what may be behind these two different sects, because they do seem like they are connected and yet still very distinct. We know that Din was found by a Death Watch soldier. He's wearing Death Watch armor. He's got the Death Watch symbol on him. But Din doesn't really mention anything about Death Watch. He just remembers growing up in this sect where he started wearing a helmet very early. He actually, points at the children on the planet in season 1. And he says like he's been wearing a helmet since he was their age, and they look basically about the age when Din was taken. So we can assume that he was taken and then swore the creed, as we hear about pretty early on. Um, that means that Children of the Watch must have been in active usage during or immediately after the Clone Wars. It can't be much later. I hear a lot of people say maybe Children of the Watch arose after the Great Purge, and that's just not possible anymore, because if this is a cult that is having them wear masks, it has, or wear helmets, it has to be something that was in use right when Din was taken, because he's still young when he starts wearing the helmet all of the time. And then also, yeah, now that we know that Night of a Thousand Tears is very definitely in the Imperial era, Din is a grown adult by that time. So Children of the Watch has been around at least since the Clone Wars. What else is there to say about that? Like I said, we really don't know exactly what Children of the Watch's relationship to Death Watch is. I've speculated a couple different times on it could be literal. It could be basically second generation Death Watch, and that's kind of my best guess. I think that it's probably the foundlings and maybe even some biological children of Death Watch members who were defeated or exiled or killed, especially under Maul's reign, and then when the Empire took over after the Clone Wars. Um, I've always thought that maybe the armorer and whoever else was in charge maybe kind of sequestered the younger members of Death Watch away to kind of keep them safe. But it could be less literal than that. It could be that they have a similar outlook and they're just two different sects. But there's clearly a connection, and yet they're discrete entities. So that's really all that we know right now. But what I did just kind of want to say also is that it's very clear that when we get all of this information, it is coming from an unreliable narrator. That is not to say that we have to discredit everything that the armorer says. I definitely think that when we see flashbacks of the Glassing of Mandalore, we're just supposed to take that as fact. But it's also important to remember that, like, this is a woman who clearly has reason to hate Bo-Katan, and clearly blames her for what has happened to Mandalore. So kind of in the same way that we had this conversation about Almec not believing that Jango Fett was a Mandalorian, there's a lot that we need to do to suss out what exactly we can believe and what we should kind of be wary of until Bo-Katan also has a chance to tell her side of the story. So Arica, any thoughts on that? Unreliable narrators and such?
Yeah, I definitely agree that there's a bias coming from her in terms of her account of events. She's obviously recounting it in the way that she's interpreted it. And I think that that's an important thing to keep in mind, that the story that she's told Din is both a bit of fact and both her interpretation of the meaning of what happened, which goes into this whole curse of the Darksaber thing that we'll talk about. I think that definitely what we were shown in the episode of the Empire basically just blowing everything up, that definitely happened as we saw it. But again, it's the interpretation of the reason for why that happened and what the significance of it is. That's a little bit fuzzy, and I think that it's going to be one of those situations where there's multiple sides to a story, and so we've heard her side of the story and her interpretation of it, but there may be other survivors who have a bit of a different take on it, one of whom is Bo, although she might have a similar take, I don't know. But yeah, I definitely think that at the very least we just have an incomplete narrative of what happened.
I agree. I just think that, again, there's a lot of people who are like, I side with the armor, I really love her. You can absolutely love this character, but also recognize that she's got a bias, she's got her own version of events. I also think it's important to recognize that what we've seen she is proving that she's not telling Din everything that she knows. She's not being completely upfront. She does know a lot more about the Jedi than she told him in season 1. And I mean, this whole thing about the helmets. Um in canon, we have never heard of sects of Mandalorians who refuse to remove their helmets. There was some talk that maybe it was like an ancient cult, and that they're kind of going back to it. But as far as what we saw in the Clone Wars, in Rebels, up to when we started to get new content from this show called The Mandalorian, we had never seen that. And I think that that's important to recognize because, a lot of new viewers who had never watched the animated shows kind of assumed that that's exactly what Mandalorian culture was. And then the shock for them, as well as Din, was that that's not the case. And so it's just important to remember that this is somebody who definitely is not saying as much as she knows. And I suspect that that will be the case for a while. There's going to be other surprises from the armorer's character, where we're going to find out more about her. And I'm excited for that, but I'm also really excited to get Bo's side of the story as well. I don't know, a couple of other thoughts here. I was really hoping that we'd get more of an explicit confirmation about who exactly Paz Vizsla is in relation to Pre Vizsla. These are two characters that clearly have, like I said, this similar connection to Death Watch and Children of the Watch. We're not really sure what that relationship is there, but clearly connected. And then, of course, the biggest thing is that they're both voiced by Jon Favreau, who, the reason why the Mandalorian exists is because he was really taken in by voicing Pre Vizsla in the Clone Wars originally. So, on the one hand, I could just see it as being a fun little Easter egg where Jon wanted to voice one of the Mandos, and people thought, great, let's have you voice somebody, and we'll give him a name that's very similar to the character that you originally played. And there might not be any significance beyond that. But in this episode, I was really hoping that as Paz is really, staring very intently at the Darksaber that he sees in Din's hands, I was really hoping that eventually we would get a comment that was like, that blade belonged to my father or my uncle or my cousin or something like that. What we got instead was we got some nice reflection on Tar Vizsla, who is originally mentioned in Rebels, the Mandalore, who also was a Jedi. And that's always just a tension that always strikes me as so interesting, because what we see is, Mando Jedi relations, the Mandalorians see the Jedi as their enemies, and we see that all through the Clone Wars, that Pre Vizsla and Death Watch are committed not only to destroying the pacifists, but also to destroying Jedi, and that's what they set out to do. So to have this symbol of Mandalorian leadership that is ironically a tie between Mandalorians and Jedi is always something that I thought just adds such a nice texture to this whole story. So that's really interesting as well. One other thing that I wanted to just mention, as we're still in this very heavy expository section of the episode, we really don't know too much about what the armorer and Paz Vizsla talk about when they talk about the creed. This is not something that is established in the EU or anything like that. But it definitely seems like in this cult of Children of the Watch, Din mentions that he swore the creed, and that's when he started wearing the helmet. It is interesting because, again, from the armorer's perspective, and maybe from the rest of Mandalorian culture's perspective, we're not really sure yet. This idea of creed is very important. So she mentions that the Darksaber was not won by creed in battle. And so that's a reason why she doesn't believe that Bo-Katan is worthy of holding it. Again, all of this is playing into the curse that Mandalore is going to be laid to waste and the people scattered to the four winds, which is exactly what we have seen that twice in 2 generations, the Mandalorians have basically been um, all but destroyed, and then the remnant is what comes and starts to grow again. If you haven't watched Rebels, you might have missed things like the fact that the blade is very heavy for Din to wield. I really liked this detail because it ties in very nicely to what we see in Rebels when Sabine starts to use the Darksaber, and she says that it's heavier than she thought it would be. And Kanan has a nice long exposition about how it's not that you're simply fighting with a blade, it's much more that you're directing a current of power, and that you have to really respect this sword, and that as she connects with the blade, it starts to feel lighter. So that's something that we're definitely going to be seeing going forward. Din clearly needs to learn how to connect with this sword, and it just so happens that his son is currently with a Jedi. So, Arica, do you want to say anything about where you expect this episode is going to be going on that front?
Well, I mean, it could go a couple of ways. I know I've seen a lot of people theorizing that Din is going to meet up with Luke again, mostly because he pretty much says by the end of the episode that he's got somebody to go visit, and it has to be Grogu. And so a lot of people are speculating that that means we're going to see Luke as well. And yeah, I think it's possible that if Din needs somebody to teach him how to wield some kind of a lightsaber, there you go. Like, he's arguably the master of that craft right now, and so who better to teach him how to handle a saber than Luke Skywalker himself. I don't know if this is something we're actually gonna see in season 3 of The Mandalorian, or if it's just gonna get skipped over and then referenced. That could go either way. I could see that going either way. I don't really know what the plan is in terms of cameos for these big legacy characters, so to speak, if there's still more of that down the pipeline. I know that people have all sorts of theories about that, but yeah, I think it's a possibility given what we know right now.
I mean, I'm definitely hearing a lot more speculation about cameos, given that Dave Filoni's episode is the next one. So we will see what he plans to bring in, but I'm definitely expecting that next week's episode will be quite newsworthy as well. The only other thing that I wanted to mention of all of this new information that we got during the first half of this episode is that we got this really, really interesting Chekhov's gun. If you know Chekhov's gun, it's a term used in well, originally in theater, but also in literature, where it's this idea that if there's a gun on stage or in your scene, it's basically required to go off in order to justify its existence. And in this case, what we got was this line after Din hesitantly reveals to the armorer that he has indeed removed his helmet now, and she has basically declared him anathema. She says that according to creed, one may only be redeemed in the living waters beneath the mines of Mandalore. And he says, but all the mines have been destroyed. And she says, this is the way. So that's really interesting, because that's clearly setting up a lot of stuff in season 3. My guess is that we are going to see the ruins of the Glassing of Mandalore, and we will be seeing at least one of these destroyed, or maybe not so destroyed, mines. And hopefully Din will have to go, he'll try to figure out how he's going to be able to atone for this the sin of removing his helmet. So lots of stuff that they're already setting up for season 3. I'm really excited. I can't wait to get that season, because I suspect that it will be a lot of new information, since the first couple of seasons really covered a lot that new viewers to Star Wars content may have missed if they hadn't watched the animated series. So, is there anything else that we want to talk about? Kind of the overview of this episode. Anything that you want to mention, Arica, about the second half of the episode with the shipbuilding and all of that?
I just thought it was really awesome. I was very excited to see the kind of ship that we were getting to build. Definitely was not expecting that, but it was a really, really nice nod to both the prequels and the fans, I think. I'm pretty sure they knew people were gonna get really excited about that. So
it is really interesting that Din is now going to see his baby, who is with Luke Skywalker, and Din is going to show up in Luke Skywalker's mother's ship. Not her ship personally, but a Nubian starfighter, which you know, I'm not sure if he'll know the significance of it, but that's just kind of a nice thought. Yeah, I really loved the second half of the episode. Like I said, the first half was just so heavy. The second half was just pure joy. And I thought Amy Sedaris she kills it as Pelly. I love her character. I love that she just kind of leans into the cheesiness. I do definitely, I've had a couple people say, and I'll also say that I think that she works a little bit better in smaller doses in episodes, but she's just such a joy that it's hard to even be mad about that. I had one of my friends, as we were watching it, came up with this idea that I'm definitely committed to now, which is romance between Pelimoto and Hondo Onaka. I'm totally on board with this now. And the more that I think about it, the more that I am committed, because this is a woman who has said that she has never been off world before. And who better to show her than the man who has seen everything? So I'm imagining that they fall in love and he steals her ship parts, and then she upgrades his ship and has the time of her life doing it. They're basically going to be space Aladdin and Jasmine, and he's going to show her a whole new world. So that's my crack ship now, and I just want everyone to know that I'm totally on board with that. I also think that those two together would be absolute chaos, but I also feel like they would kind of moderate each other. And so I'm just saying I would watch that series.
I agree. Like at first when I saw this mentioned, I was like, I don't know, but I thought about it for about 2 minutes. I was like, no, yeah, I think strangely this would work.
He's also got to be an upgrade from a Jawa, right?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. Hondo's a lot, but I'd say he's an upgrade from a Jawa. And I mean, assuming everything with Ezra goes well, he's definitely getting the spot as best man in the wedding, I would assume, since he's clearly Hondo's new best friend. So
yep. So I'm committed to this now. I expect this to happen. Let's see. Well, I don't think that there's much else to say. Again, great direction from Bryce Dallas Howard, keeping us as engaged with all the shipbuilding as with any other major exciting space battle. Absolutely loved it. Just pure Star Wars for me. 100%. So I guess now that we've kind of talked about any of the clarifying issues that people might have, the questions that people might have about how things fit together, all the new information that we're getting, Arica, I know that you wanted to talk a little bit about kind of some thematic and character parallels that you're seeing. So why don't you take it away?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much going on here. It's hard for me to keep track of it all, but one of the things that I've been noticing about the new content, not just in this show but just in general, is how it's really dealing with this idea of how do we, I guess, how do we look at the past and how do we integrate it into the present as well as into planning for the future on an individual basis and then also on a larger scale? And I see that happening right now, specifically with Din Djarin. I think it started with his storyline. We're seeing it more with Boba Fett now too, and I think that there's a parallel also to what I would assume Luke is going through, although we may not actually get to see that on screen, which saddens me very greatly, but it is what it is. But I think that there's there was a lot of question, especially in the second season of The Mandalorian, about what it meant for Din to be a Mandalorian. And so he was very, very stuck in his old traditions, the way that he'd been raised, and then of course he encountered new people who didn't quite follow the same rules and code that he was taught to follow. And so I think that that's led him to have probably a bit of an identity crisis, trying to figure out, who am I and what does being a Mandalorian mean? And for the Mandalorians as a whole, I think also I feel like he's the vehicle for this larger storyline of maybe them having to look at their traditions that they've held for so long and figure out, what do we do with this? Because obviously we need to figure out a way to move forward into the future in a way that's going to help rebuild our society and our people. But does that mean that we have to carry over everything that we used to deem as important or necessary in the past? Or is there some of this stuff that we can let it go and or try to rework things, reinvent things, and I wouldn't say completely change what it means to be a Mandalorian, but at least consider the idea of, yeah, how do we reinvent ourselves, essentially? Like what new things need to be done and what things need to be changed versus what things do we need to hold on to from the past. And I think that that definitely came to the forefront again, especially in this episode, with Din basically just getting kicked out of his cult, I would say, and now he really doesn't have a place. And I feel like he's kind of like in this weird in between place where there's a part of him just on instinct is still adhering to the things that he's been brought up with, whereas but that's also in conflict with this newer part of him that's gone out and experienced other things in the galaxy and met new people and encountered different points of view, and those two things are kind of at war with each other right now, and he's trying to figure out, how do I put all this information together? How much does he have to detach himself from the traditions he was brought up with, and how much does he have to hold on to? And as a whole, how much do the Mandalorians as a whole have to do that as well? And I see an interesting parallel there between that and what's been going on with Boba Fett in the show right now, because there's definitely a narrative of reinvention with him as well. We've seen him go through this character arc where he's basically left the life of a bounty hunter behind and has decided, you know what, I don't want to do that anymore. I'm going to be in charge of my own house, as they're calling the syndicates, and I'm going to be my own boss, and I'm going to run things now and do things a bit differently with my life. And I'm also no longer going to be a lone wolf. I want to have a tribe. And that's really interesting to me to connect that with something like Din's story, because here you have these two people who are operating under very different contexts, but who have similar things going on, where they're moving away from who they were in the past or who they were brought up to be, and now trying to figure out, well, who am I now, and what things from my past do I need to integrate into this new version of myself, and what things do I need to just leave behind. And with Boba Fett, I think it's interesting because he's definitely turned over a new leaf, but there's certain things that he does still hold on to, like the armor specifically was very important to him. Like if he was just going to do this whole thing where he just put the past behind him and says, you know what, that's all done, then I guess the armor may not have been a big deal, but he was very committed to getting it back. Like that's one thing that he wanted to hold on to very tightly, because I think, you know, the personal significance to him, especially that considering it's the last connection that he really has with his father. And you see that there's still a bit of an edge to him. I think that, you know, he's not exactly the same ruthless bounty hunter that he used to be, which I know is rubbing some people the wrong way, but I think there's still an aspect to him that isn't afraid to tap into that in a certain context. I mean, we did see him blow up the whole biker gang and had obviously no remorse for doing it. That he so I think there's parts of the old Boba who are still there, but he's also reinvented other parts of himself and is trying to figure out how to, I mean, integrate old Boba with new Boba. And we have Din with his own storyline trying to integrate old Din with new Din, and then to extend that even further, although we're not seeing it right now, I would assume that's what Luke is probably going through in terms of rebuilding the Jedi Order. You know, what does it mean to be a Jedi? And as he maybe learns about things from the Jedi's past, and I would hope, side note, that Ahsoka eventually figures into this somehow. Just considering, you know, how much of what the Jedi used to do am I going to incorporate in what I'm doing moving forward, and how do I incorporate that into who I want to be as an individual Jedi, and also who I want to the, you know, the Jedi that I train to be. And I think it's interesting that we're having these kinds of storylines about reinvention and how to tackle the past and where that fits into one's life as you move forward, both in terms of how it affects these characters as individual people, but also how it affects the things that they're either trying to build or what they might end up building. Because I think that, you know, with Din, we don't really know exactly where his storyline is going yet, but I assume that it's going to involve the leadership of the remaining Mandalorians at some point. And so again, it's like the question is, you know, how much of the past do we keep to influence what we're building now, not just for me as an individual person, what does that mean for me as an individual person, but also what does it mean for the institution, I would guess, that I'm trying to build, if that makes any sense.
I think it absolutely does, and it brings to mind a lot of thoughts. Um, the biggest one being that, you know, this really is a story that that resonates with a lot of people who I think are about our age, a little bit younger, a little bit older. But it strikes me that right now, there's been a lot of talk, at least in the circles that I follow, about something called deconstruction. and if you haven't heard about this, this is a word that's getting thrown a lot around a lot in religious communities, but more than just religion, also in, basically just any kind of organization that is based on ideological principles, which is, it's politics, it's culture, it's anything where there are lots of, pretty staunch opinions um on how people should live their lives, on the way that we should order our lives. um but obviously, like, religion is a big one of them. And I know that, you and we haven't um left behind our religious upbringings, but both of us have experienced, there's always this evolution, there's this um sifting and trying to figure out, um what do I keep, what do I get rid of kind of the culture and the inheritance that we've gotten from our parents. And that's something that lots of people are struggling with. I know that on Twitter, um, let's see, let me find it here. Maggie Lovett, who we follow each other, and she's doing writing for the news site Collider. She just put out an article today, which I haven't gotten around to reading yet, that is about how the Book of Boba Fett revisits Din Djarin's complicated relationship with his religion and how it's an allegory for that. And I think that that absolutely matches up to exactly what you're saying, where um, especially in these times of struggle and um, just where, times where it just feels like the sand is shifting all around you. You really have to figure out where you're going to find solid ground. And for Din, we saw that in this episode where he's got to wrestle with his upbringing and the fact that he's just committed basically this heinous sin, that the armor has said, you're no longer a Mandalorian unless you atone. And as of right now, it seems like that atonement isn't even possible. But what we saw in season 2 of The Mandalorian, just like you said, was that Mandalorians do not all look alike. And even more so than we've seen on the show. I mean, we've gotten the people like Bo, who are of noble families, of noble birth, and we've got people like Boba, who his father was a foundling, and there's a complicated relationship with um, Boba and Mandalorian culture as well. And we haven't even seen hide nor hair of the pacifists, which I think would just blow Din's mind in a completely different way. But it's very clear that all of this is going to be factoring into Din's view of um, how to interpret the fact that his leader just basically said, you're not really salvageable unless you can figure out a way to do this impossible thing. What's really interesting, though, is that if you listen closely in the episode, she basically says, you're not a Mandalorian anymore. He goes and he gets the first flight to Tatooine, and when he's stopped by the droid says, you can't take your weapons on, and he says, I am a Mandalorian. Weapons are part of my religion, which is really interesting, of course, because he's parroting the same kinds of things that he was in season 1 that really reflect his upbringing. But also, it's kind of a big deal that he asserts that he is still, in fact, Mandalorian, when the leader of this tribe, of the Children of the Watch, has basically said otherwise. And so we're already seeing a bit of independent thinking and sifting of this knowledge as he decides what his identity is going to look like. And now, unlike season 1, he's got other options. And we are going to see Bo-Katan again, and she's gonna, I'm sure, explain a lot more about Mandalorian culture that Din has never known. So I'm really excited to see where this goes. I really just think that, like, this really is a story that resonates with a lot of people for a lot of different reasons. And good storytelling is always going to have real life applications.
Yeah.
And I think that they're doing a great job with that.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of this, the story really just has to do with recontextualizing things, and which is, that's hard to do if you're used to looking at things in a black and white sort of way, which I feel like a lot of these characters have. And it introduces a little bit of a gray area where it's not so much, okay, well, this thing didn't work, or this thing wasn't right, or something like that. And there may be things that do fit that criteria, but a lot of the times it's just about finding those things, and instead of just dismissing them entirely, trying to figure out, well, how do I tweak this so that it does work, or that it is more applicable to what's going on with me, or with, my group, or whatever it is now, as opposed to, well, it's just bad and I'm going to get rid of it. And I think specifically about Luke, to go back to the Jedi side of it, where there's this whole thing about the attachment rule, and this is just one of these things that I think that there's a lot of people who still have questions regarding that. And how was this just kept in place, or was this altered, or is it different now, or is it going to be different? And I think that that's a big thing, where it's not so much a question of do we keep it or get rid of it, but more, do we figure out the nuance here of why it didn't work, and how do we alter it a little bit to make it work, I would say. Because it wasn't necessarily the concept itself that was bad. I think it was the execution. And I think that that's what happens with any sort of ideological institution. It's like you can have these good ideas, but the way that those ideas are executed is really, that's gonna make the most difference. And so with Din's story, like, a lot of the traditions that he was brought up with, I don't think would necessarily be bad. It's just the way that they're executed, the way that they're interpreted, may need to be changed a little bit, both for him and anybody else who's around. And for Boba Fett, I think as well, with him, I find it interesting because it's almost like being presented in an almost like professional capacity. He's like this disgruntled employee who got fed up with corporate BS and like poor management, and decided, what, I'm quitting my job and I'm becoming my own boss. And because I know what it's like to be treated like crap by the bosses, I'm gonna do something different, and I'm gonna treat my employees better. Like, and it's just this interesting idea of him taking principles that I think that a lot of these other crime bosses have used, but implementing them slightly differently, which is why the respect thing, I think, is such a big thing for him, because he knows what it's like to not be treated with respect. So he's making a point to treat everybody who works for him with respect. But at the end of the day, he's still acting like a crime boss. So it's not like an either or situation. It's sort of like he's putting these two things together. So I just find that really interesting and also pretty entertaining.
I really like the fact that when he releases Chrysanthemum, he says, "Don't work for scugholes who are going to get you killed," and it's like he's including Vader in that list, right? He's got to be including Vader in that list. I mean, I think that's kind of a big one. So Vader's a scug-hole now, according to Boba Fett. So yeah, no, I completely agree. I think that all really good points about kind of the ideological extremism and stuff like that. I just kind of look at it like, there are a lot of institutions, religious or otherwise, that I mean, the whole idea is that if you believe that you have the truth of something, well, that's not going to change through the ages. But at the same time, an institution that does not seek to remain relevant to generations as they go on, eventually it's going to falter by the wayside. You have to be able to interpret yourself and convey yourself in a way that makes people want to be a part of your institution. Where you get into trouble is where there's kind of a culture of, well, my family has always gone to this church, or my family has always voted in this particular way. And then when younger people start to feel like they don't quite match up, they have to go through this deconstruction process. And that is what we are seeing, I think, in great deal in this generation. And so I just think that there's absolutely the ability to have healthy institutions. And in fact, institutions of any kind are absolutely necessary to the flourishing of the culture, because it's the only way that you can mobilize people to be a collective force for good. Everybody can do something. Everybody can go to a food pantry, but the food pantry doesn't exist unless there's a group of people around which they have decided that they need to create and maintain and foster a community that cares about having a food pantry. So I just think that our generation has a very prominent distrust of institutions. And I think that that's something to be wary of, because institutions are necessary, but our generation also has a lot of good points to make about the fact that we really do have to seek to I like to say reinterpret ourselves to younger generations. We cannot assume that the talking points of any political party, any religious institution that were used 50 years ago are going to have the same impact on a generation that was not around when those arguments were used. So that's what I think, just all good things to keep in mind as we all go through these periods of evolution. And in fact, I mean, not even just periods, life is just evolution of our ideas and what we want to live our lives by. So like I said, good art, good stories are always going to have those connections to the real world, make you really think about these kinds of things. So I think that it's great that just watching Star Wars can raise big questions like this. So any other thoughts from your end?
I'm just curious to see how this all, ties together. I'm a big, I'm a big fan of stories that have multiple different threads that tie together, which is one of the reasons why I'm a fan of the MCU. And so I'm excited to see this era of Star Wars going in a similar direction. I like when they tease other character storylines, or they tease things that might tie into a much larger storyline, even if they don't get to it right away. And I like how they've been planting little seeds here and there of, this is how this character's story plays into this other character's story, and this is how all the stories are going to play into this larger story that seems to be being set up. I definitely think to speak about the Boba Fett series specifically, I think that this just being about a war with the Pikes is way too easy. I think that there's going to be something bigger than that, that's building up to it, that they're building up to. Because it just seems way too obvious to me that, oh yeah, well, they've mentioned that the Pikes are a big deal now, and I'm expecting some sort of a cliffhanger at the end of this season. I don't know what it's gonna be, but yeah, I think that they're building things up. Like they'll start with one thing and then tease something else and then build upon it in the next installment of whatever it is. That's kind of how they did it with the Mandalorian. End of season 1, here's the Darksaber, and then the story got a lot bigger in season 2. So I expect this to happen with Boba Fett's story, and that all of these stories are going to build upon each other, and we'll just get a gigantic Russian doll of Star Wars storytelling.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm really not sure where it's going either. I mean, we got 2 episodes left. We really don't know if we're going to see Grogu. We don't know if we are going to see Luke. We don't know what exactly this whole battle with the Pikes is going to lead to. When this series started, I really had questions as to whether Boba would even be alive at the end of the series. Personally, I think that he will be now. I just don't really see I don't see this show building to main character death at the end. But when we started, I certainly wasn't sure, especially when this isn't really billed as a multi-season show. So but like you said, I definitely could expect to have both of these characters alive, and we'll see them in different iterations later on. I like you, I think that there probably will be something much bigger coming. This thing with the Pikes seems too easy. But I'm not really sure what that will all entail. I don't usually put a lot of stock into like, oh, some big cameos coming at the end, but I definitely could see Kira coming back. I definitely think like she's part of the story that would really make sense to bring her in. And Emilia Clarke wants to be back so badly. So I say bring her back. I love that character. I would love to see her again. I'd also really love to see Cobb Vanth. I know that, Boba's looking for muscle. I don't know how great Cobb would be in a fight against an intergalactic crime syndicate. But I just think like if they don't bring him back, like that's a connection that Boba has, or at least Boba knew that he was using his armor before. I just think that like if he doesn't seek him out, knowing that like Cobb was using the armor as a force for good, that's just kind of a waste as we're on Tatooine here. So I'd love to see him again.
Yeah.
But other than that, yeah, I think that the last 2 episodes are kind of a shot in the dark in terms of speculating as to where they're going.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely think that there's got to be something related to Crimson Dawn coming into this. Like it feels like that's the direction it might be going in. I definitely think we could see Kira, and I also think there's a possibility that I don't know if he's still alive, but a lot of people have wanted to see Cad Bane involved in this. I think now there's a possibility that he could be like a big cliffhanger ending for this. Like I don't know, he shows up and he's working for the Pikes, and then Boba's already pitted against them, so now we've got him working for his mortal enemy. And that I from a storytelling standpoint, I could see something like that happening. I'm interested if that does happen to see what he looks like in live action, because I'm trying to see this in my head and it's a little bit difficult, but yeah. And I think that's just like in terms of this larger storyline that's supposed to connect all of these different shows. I've seen a couple people theorizing that, of course, the other blue guy, there's some connection with Thrawn that's going to get hinted at, like maybe a little tiny one. And I could see it. I don't think that it would be anything obvious, and I don't even know if that would happen right away. But I mean, if he's hanging out in the unknown regions planning something, he does need resources. And so what better way to get resources than by being in contact with an underground crime syndicate that can supply him with things that he needs under the New Republic's noses. So I could see something like that happening as well.
Yeah, who knows, we're just gonna have to see. And now that we're back, we'll be back to recount those last episodes. So it's been too long. It's been so good to come back. Thank you to our listeners who are still around, who still want this content. We really appreciate you. And you can also look forward to another kind of a bonus ep this week. She wasn't able to record with us today, but on a couple days from now, I'm going to be recording kind of part 2. And Arica, I think that you'll be there as well. With Meg Dowell. Meg Dowell was on one time before when we had our all Mandalorian extravaganza. So she really loves this Mandalorian context, and we've been geeking out all week about this new information that we've been getting with this last episode. So this was kind of more of a clinical overview of this episode, answering questions, that kind of thing. Meg's episode will be much more emotional probably. And I have not promised that there won't be tears when we talk about the destruction of Sundari. I'm just gonna say. So feel free to check in again in a couple of days when that's out. And then we'll have additional content coming at this same time next week. Other than that, thank you so much. Reach out to us at Darksaber Light on Twitter, and we hope to be bringing you more content very soon. So have a wonderful day, and may the Force be with you.